Good afternoon to you. Mark Sudduth, HurricaneTrack here. Sunday now, the 8th day of September 2024. Looking at a possible hurricane in the Gulf of Mexico. Now, this is going to be a very complicated setup. And, of course, we know that intensity forecasting is the hardest part of getting a hurricane forecast right. So there's going to be a lot to watch as it comes to this system. Invest area 91L. Going to really need to pay attention to it. There's definitely potential. We've got a couple of big models, the GFS and the Euro, both suggesting that there could be significant strengthening with this system. And remember, A, we're talking about the Gulf of Mexico, where we have seen systems overperform, and B, we're talking about the Gulf of Mexico, where we know that storm surge is a greater risk even in just tropical storms. That is to say nothing about the other impacts, of course, wind and the potential for very heavy rain in an area that has already had a lot of rainfall. So that's the main feature we're going to be watching, but the rest of the tropics are, of course, pretty busy today. Nothing to worry about just yet, but we definitely don't have a blank map, so to speak, out in the tropical Atlantic. We'll take a look at all of that and more as we progress through today's update. So starting from the National Hurricane Center homepage, let's start in the east first. Two areas here that are certainly worth watching, but they're way out in the open Atlantic, and they're not going to bother anybody. We'll see if these develop. There's still just some kind of a weird funk going on out here that's not allowing these systems to spin up. They're moving very slow and erratic. It's just very odd. But, as we suspected could be the case, we would focus our attention over here. If it's not going to happen out here, it can happen in the western part of the basin. And that is exactly what we are seeing this afternoon with Invest Area 91L. And you know, when you get two paragraphs for one system in the Tropical Weather Outlook, that's a big deal. So we have an elongated area of low pressure right now, and I'm going to show you that both on satellite, the actual cloud shot, and on the vorticity product. It's pretty interesting. But basically 90% chance that this goes on to become a tropical storm, and they are explicitly saying that additional development, a tropical storm is expected to form during the next day or so, and they do think that additional strengthening is possible by the middle part of the upcoming week. This is what everything looks like in terms of the graphic version. This has a high chance of development. This is medium, and then we've got our system 91L over here. So while not as active as we thought it would be the last few weeks, as we approach the peak of the Atlantic hurricane season, which is traditionally September the 10th, roughly, well, here we are. So let's pay attention to it. We need to. So again, working from east to west, here are our disturbances out in the tropical Atlantic. Again, just a lot of weird interaction with the monsoon trough. Dry mid-level air sitting out here. Even in the upper levels of the atmosphere, the air just seems to be a little bit too warm. And you know what's funny about that? When I say too warm, I'm still talking in the minus 50s Celsius, and it's all about how instability works, what we call lapse rates. But even just a little bit of that lapse rate being off, you can throw off the whole mechanism to get deep convection. Nevertheless, a couple of systems to watch out in the eastern Atlantic and central Atlantic there, but again, neither of them obviously a concern over the next few days. But this is, and it's a complicated setup. We've got our front that came off. My daughter peeked her head outside a little while ago. She's like, it's cold. While not officially cold, it certainly felt cold to that summer girl who enjoys summer, of course, here in southeast North Carolina. It's meteorological fall, but still we haven't gone into astronomical fall yet. So, you know, she was expecting a lot warmer temperatures, I guess. But it's also still hurricane season. We've got to focus on this area right down here. And like the Hurricane Center said, it's an elongated area, and it is kind of complicated. We've got the remnants of the energy that was at one point 90L, and then you've got that tropical wave that came all the way across and gave us all that anxiety last week about, oh, this could develop into something big, and then the models were like, no, it won't. And then they were like, yes, it will, and we went back and forth. So here's that energy, that tropical wave energy now, and this whole area should congeal somewhere down here where the Hurricane Hunter aircraft from Keesler, old Keesler Air Force Base there in Biloxi, they're there, and we'll get on-site data here in the coming hours, and that'll help with forecasting and the model input and all that good stuff. But yeah, that's the area. It's not your classic look just yet, but the water temperatures down here are still very warm. The upper levels are getting more and more conducive to development. And you can even see that in the satellite shot here. You notice how these clouds are kind of going like this, the indication of a developing upper level anticyclone. But up here to the north, certainly some strong winds coming from west-southwest to east-northeast, and that would shear anything that got up there. But the weather will change, certainly. This isn't going to just stay here, probably, and there's a lot that's going to have to depend on what that upper level anticyclone does. In other words, the umbrella for this system to get under and have a favorable upper level pattern to develop from. All of that is going to factor into how this thing progresses over the coming days. Now, this is what it looks like on the vorticity signature. And we use black here. Oh, white will make it pop better. So the original area 90L right in here probably, but this is what I'm looking at. That seems to be the most concentrated area of vorticity or spin in the atmosphere. To me, this is the easiest way, if this is the first time you've seen one of my videos or you've only seen a couple and I'm showing this to you for the first time, this is how I look at the structure at the lowest part of the atmosphere, about 5,000 feet or so. And this tells me about the foundation, the framework of a developing system. And when you see that energy trying to bundle like that, and out here, this is the other system. By the way, this is Invest Area 92L. They did tag that. But that's what we look for. These are your seedlings that develop in the Atlantic or anywhere else in the tropical oceans. And of course, we can see vorticity signatures of mid-latitude entities everywhere else, some of it stretched out for thousands of miles. But with tropical cyclones, they are trying to bundle that energy around a developing core, which could eventually happen, and then you get a well-developed hurricane, tropical cyclone being the generic term, if all of that can continue. So seeing this kind of getting together down there in the Bay of Campeche, southern Gulf of Mexico, is interesting. Let's see if I can zoom in on this really tight. I certainly can. And again, right in here seems to be where it's coming together the most. This will start to fade off. It'll kind of feed into it. The waters down here are still 30, 31 Celsius easily. In other words, very, very warm. We're talking mid to upper 80s. And as such, the GFS especially is taking off with this system in quite substantial fashion. Blue should be good to point all this out. So this is very, very important. And I want you to pay close attention to this because this is what we mean when we say it's a complex setup. So this is the vorticity map in the model. This previous feature that I showed you right here, that is the observed vorticity signatures. If you peeled away the clouds, that's what you would see underneath, so to speak. And this is a satellite product. This is the GFS, the Global Forecast System, numeric model output of that vorticity. And then we're going to see how it does over the next several days. All right? So, oh, it's trying to drop me out. There we go. So down here, you see there's multiple areas where it's concentrated. One right there, these little lobes, if you will. And there's 3 or 4 of them down there, maybe even another one here. And that's what the Hurricane Center means by an elongated area of low pressure or energy. It is not bundled yet. So here's the clue. This is where it's really important. And on one hand, very easy to figure out what might happen. We're going to look at this frame by frame over the next about 96 hours. All right, so this is valid basically right now, and it pretty much matches what we see here for the most part. This is valid from 15 UTC, so it's pretty close. Those match up pretty well. So let's just move this out. This would be this evening. And then let's get into early tomorrow morning. So by tomorrow morning, the GFS is suggesting that that vorticity starts to really bundle better. The energy, let's just call it the energy, bundling better here in the southwest Gulf of Mexico. And that is 24 hours from this morning. So let's move it out to 30 hours, which is right there. This to me is a huge benchmark. If it really is bundled up like that, 30 hours out tomorrow afternoon, we will be able to see it. So when I do my update tomorrow afternoon, I'll be able to show you this and compare it to tomorrow afternoon's version of this. And we should see something that resembles that. And if we do, then we know the GFS is on to this and then what I show you going forward becomes much more important and much more relevant. All right, so let's continue. So that's 30 hours, and then there's 36. I mean, it just really starts to take off at this point. Now we are at 48 hours. It would be a bona fide solid tropical storm in the model here, and it's over those very warm water temperatures. It continues to strengthen. It looks very healthy in the model. You can even detect hints of an eye. If you look real closely, that would be an eye right there. And that's a hurricane in the model, absolutely. In fact, if we look at it, at the 10-meter wind and the mean sea level pressure, yeah, 64, something like that. A very compact, strong hurricane. Where? In the Northwest Gulf, headed right for southwest Louisiana, continuing to strengthen right up to landfall somewhere there near Vermilion Bay, Morgan City, in the overnight hours of Wednesday into Thursday. Not ideal at all, considering all the rain they've had down there. We know the storm surge risks, especially in Vermilion Bay, Sycamore Point and vicinity. So the question is, and then let's just run this out, what happens with it? It finally just dissipates there over the lower Mississippi Valley. But let's go back to that vorticity signature and show you the evolution. Look at how it really ramps up and gets up in there, and would be a solid hurricane hit in Louisiana. Kind of a rare thing. We usually don't see these come in like this, but Zeta was pretty similar. Not exactly, but Zeta 2020, Delta 2020, those had their origins more in this area, if memory serves. So it's not unprecedented, and every one of these is different, of course. But that's what it looks like on the GFS, okay? Now let's see what this looks like on the all-important Euro. Because what you want to see when you're looking for this kind of stuff is you don't want to put out cherry-picking one model that fits what many would perceive as some kind of an agenda to get people to watch videos or whatever. And even I, from a planning standpoint, this is why it's so important that I put these videos out. This is exactly what we look for. If we're going to go out and set up those cameras, it costs a lot of money to do so, and I'm not going to go if it's going to be a elongated area of sheared whatever. It's not that it doesn't matter, but we're really interested in the hurricanes for obvious reasons, because those have the most impacts, especially versus a strung out, highly sheared system. Those are still important, but the hurricanes are more important, and I think that's very obvious. So we look at this, my team and I were constantly texting on the phone, and I'm telling you, the whole process, even if I didn't have a YouTube and social media audience, this is exactly what I would look like. Look like or look at. Sorry, I would still look like this too. We want to see consistency between models. And that just makes sense. I'm telling you the obvious, but I'm also just restating it. This is exactly how we analyze things from a field mission perspective. And it's very important because we need to know how much asset to bring with us. All that kind of stuff, right? So we know what the GFS shows. And let's just take this to 72 hours, all right? So that's what the GFS has. What about the Euro? So the Euro starts out with a pretty large area of elongated energy. So that matches pretty good. 24 hours out, we only get 24-hour increments here because it's coming off the tidbit site. So here's tomorrow morning. And, I mean, already the Euro suggesting that the energy bundles down there in the Southwest Gulf, very similar to where the GFS has it. So a little bit of consistency there. That's interesting to see. 48 hours out, very similar to what the GFS shows. 72 hours out, very similar. The GFS is stronger, but the Euro is not substantially weaker. And that is very important to note in terms of its organization. Now, if we look at the actual pressure, yes, the Euro is quite a bit weaker. It's 993. The GFS in here, if we look at the pressure, sitting at about 966. So, yeah, pretty big difference there pressure-wise. But organizationally speaking, the Euro is in the wheelhouse. It is. It's very similar to the GFS. So that's 72 hours. At 96 hours, and we get the in-between part that we miss. But this tells me that those in-between frames, that is still a substantial, probably a Category 1 hurricane coming into central Louisiana there. And if we, again, look at the pressure, I mean, look, it's 989. So we go from here at 993 to 989, and yet it's 200 miles inland. You can infer that somewhere down here in Vermilion Bay at that landfall, it's strengthening. And then the other part of this, and this is huge, folks, for you in Louisiana, that implies strengthening up to landfall. That is very, very important. Now, the next thing I'm going to tell you, I'm going to warn you right now, do not take this out of context and read into it more than what I am saying. I am basing this on experience and using that experience to make sure that my friends in Louisiana, and I've made a lot of friends down there over the years, they don't like the hurricanes, but they mostly appreciate what we do. Not everybody does, and that's fine, but we do. We have a lot of friends that trust what I say and what my team and I do and what we say on our respective social media platforms. So what I'm a little bit worried about, because it is based on experience, right up here, it's all logged here, and again, don't read more into this, but remember Michael had a lot of similar things said about it. Oh, it'll be an east-weighted, sheared mess, late season. Of course, Michael was a month later. It didn't look like it was going to do much. And even the very first advisory from the National Hurricane Center had Michael as a 70-mile-per-hour tropical storm at landfall. They nearly nailed the track. I think it was 5 days out, but the intensity was way, way off by over 80 miles an hour or something like that, probably more than that, because, of course, Michael, as we know, was a Category 5. Mark is not saying, oh, this is going to become a Category 5. Mark is saying the model never showed a Category 5. The GFS and others, when they were showing this, and the GFS, by the way, did a great job with Michael early on in showing that strengthening up to landfall. The other models had to catch up. You can go back and see this. This is all there. We have the receipts. So my worry is, A, both of these powerhouse models are showing intensification right up to landfall, and then B, what does that tell us about the atmosphere, and could this strengthen a lot more than what we're seeing here? So we can't take these numbers at absolute face value. So the risk is saying, oh, okay, it strengthens, it looks like a Category 1 or 2 hurricane, no big deal. A lot of people thought that about Michael, and it intensified quite a bit more. So did Zeta in 2020. Kind of a different setup, certainly, but just the risk of underestimating these things, that is the problem. This complacency that we think we know more than the science tells us. And the science right here is saying, maybe a low-end hurricane, but you just need to ask yourself, what if it isn't? And just make sure you're ready for that. Cajun friends down there, they know hurricanes. Louisiana, that's hurricane country for sure. But just reminding you, all right, it gives me a little bit of pause when I see it strengthen all the way to landfall and beyond there. Like, right, it goes right on up to landfall. So some of the things we need to look at, though, let's go back to the GFS. Those are your check marks in the pro column, pro strengthening. What could go against this? Let's move it right up to just before landfall. GFS has 957 millibars approaching Vermilion Bay. So let's go look at the upper part of the atmosphere, 200 millibars, and let's see what could go wrong. Well, first of all, it is sitting on the northwest side of that huge area of upper level anticyclonic flow. Like if it was sitting right underneath it, forget it. That's a massive hurricane. It's sitting up on the northwest corner. Now what is interesting is, and this is where Michael does come into play, the way this enters this area, the upper levels could ventilate it just right. We call that divergence, where the air is spreading out so that this gets ventilated and does strengthen a lot more than we are anticipating. But, huge, gigantic but here, right? The fine line between perfect ventilation and getting sheared, where that upper level energy impinges on it just enough to start to separate or tilt the vortex, that is a razor thin margin. It certainly seems to be, right? And we didn't know that ahead of Michael. That couldn't be foreseen. And it literally is just probably tens of miles of how these things interact with the jet there. And we cannot forecast that. Obviously, with Michael, that was 48 hours out that we started to get a good hint that this would significantly intensify. But Michael kept going right up to landfall, maybe even a few miles inland from there, because it was perfect. A Category 5, October 10th, over marginally warm enough water temperatures, like 81, 82 degrees. We're not talking ridiculous anomalies or anything. And that brings me to the next part. What do the sea surface temperatures show? Those are also favorable, but we have pulled down those temps a little bit because of that disturbed area of weather that's been up here. But still, don't let this blue and purple fool you. That is a 29 right there. What does that mean? 29 degrees Celsius, so about 83, 84, something like that. Fahrenheit, plenty warm enough, and it certainly is warmer over towards Vermilion Bay. And between the 30 degrees Celsius isotherm there, isotherm is line of equal temperature, and let's just assume it comes in somewhere in here. Yeah, the water temperatures are warm enough, so don't look at this or think, oh, the rain has cooled everything off. Well, yes, it has, and maybe that'll cap this, but I'm telling you, you only need 81, 82, and you get the right ventilation and everything else. We saw it with Michael, and I keep emphasizing that because we just don't know about intensity. And it could go the other way, and it ends up being a lopsided big rainmaker. And of course, rain is an impact. Say it with me. Yes, of course it's an impact. But this one has the makings of potentially being a wind and surge event as well. Now, the anomalies have dropped. We're actually looking at a tiny little area of below average, but even below average, I just showed you, is still 29 degrees Celsius or thereabouts. I want to show you one tweet here from Andy and Tomer. You guys should know who these folks are. Andy, obviously watching this very closely. He's down there at the University of Miami, works at the NOAA AOML HRD, which is the Hurricane Research Division. And Andy mentioning it too, GFS in a remarkably aggressive solution for, and he meant to say 91L, I believe. That's okay. We'll spot Andy that one. With a Cat 2-3 hurricane into Louisiana, it's able to maintain enough convection on the upshear or southwest side to keep the dry air out of the core and allow for steady deepening. This is a bit of an outlier for now, but we'll see. Now, he posted this 2 hours ago. Now, of course, we know the Euro is similar, not as dramatic, but the Euro does not show a sheared, sloppy mess. And I like what Tomer said, and we just talked about that. I showed you. I'd imagine, Tomer says, there's two main questions: how quickly it can develop and how far east it remains relative to the Mexican coast. I'm also skeptical of this scenario, and then you can just imply what I just talked about. Stranger things have happened, and we saw those stranger things in times not too long ago. So I just want you to pay attention, not be fearful. I'm not here to scare you, but I'm here to make sure if you're in Louisiana, you got a lot of other stuff going on in your lives just like I do. It is still hurricane season, and we want to be prepared no matter what. All right? With that, I'll bid you a great rest of your Sunday afternoon. From all of us at HurricaneTrack. Oh, and of course, by the way, yes, please do subscribe to the channel. We try to do some really remarkable work, and we can do it with you following us, and you can share this information with others. We hope you find it useful and helpful, and hopefully you learn something. And of course, the notification button, bell, whatever it is, push it, enable it, because when we go live, you're going to want to tune in, because yes, we will be there if indeed this does come to pass. And with that, I'll bid you a great rest of your Sunday afternoon from all of us at HurricaneTrack. I'm Mark Sudduth. I'll see you again probably early tomorrow morning.